Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. It's not rare that people accuse me of being overly positive on China, and that is actually a fair accusation. But it is quite rare that I get asked why I'm constantly positive and why I never say anything negative. And the truth is, I do have complaints about China. In fact, I have many. But there are a couple of considerations that we need to look at before I share them. Firstly, my complaints are usually insignificant, personal complaints anyway. Secondly, as a foreigner in China, I have options. I can accept them, or I can leave China, because I can't change them. And thirdly, perhaps most importantly, the things I think China needs to change mostly do not affect me personally. And I have no right as a foreigner to involve myself in my host country's internal affairs. I can't really ask for or even agitate for changes to something that doesn't affect me. So with those 3 points in mind, here goes with some criticisms of China. I think for Chinese people, both the health and the hukou systems need revisiting. And for foreigners, the hotel industry, the banking, and the visa systems all need revision. Let's look closely at what I mean. For the Chinese people, first of all, until very recently, health costs were a major concern for most Chinese people. The expense and the corruption inside the industry were palpable. But the Chinese government recently launched a massive, and I mean massive, review of this, and we have to wait and see where that leads. Pharmaceutical companies being brought into line now. Doctors overprescribing was a huge problem, but it's being reviewed right now. And lack of healthcare insurance meant many people needed to save or borrow large amounts of money to cover medical emergencies. China has instituted a social reform over the last 10 or 15 years, and medical insurance is now included in everybody's work package. It isn't as well developed as it could be. It's still in development, but it's constantly being reviewed and it is improving. So while I have complaints about the health industry, they are being addressed, and any complaints that I have should really wait and see if the problems remain after this has all been done. The hukou system, or household registration, is a big problem for many Chinese people. But again, some changes have been instigated. It's now possible for the children of migrant workers to go to school in the cities where their parents live and work, but which isn't their registered home. This was impossible until a few years ago. So children and parents were faced with very long separations. Again, it's changing, but it still has a very long way to go. There are many other issues with the hukou system, but that might be for another video. There are two problems, the health and the hukou, that are not really mine to revise. I'm a foreigner living in a foreign land, and China could quite rightly tell me, this is not my business. It isn't. As for things which affect me personally, it's very hard, especially when I travel extended distances by bike, to find hotels that are willing to accept me. Many hotels will say they're not authorized to accept foreigners, and this is not true. They are. They either choose not to, or they don't know how to. And this does need addressing, whether it's a training, an administration, I don't know what the cause is. There are some small towns and small cities where not one hotel will accept a foreign guest. The alternative, there are two, and I've done both, are to leave the town and camp in some off-road location, or cycle, sometimes many kilometers, to the next town. That's not always easy. The banking system in China is archaic. Any foreign currency exchanges can take an entire morning. In my case, I'm regularly paid some small amounts in foreign currencies. This is an issue that relates to a visa problem that's coming up later. I have a regular pension paid into my account in China that I can now go and get converted into a current account to be issued into RMB. This I can do with an ATM card and it takes minutes. But other transactions can take at least 40 minutes, considerably longer if there's more than one currency involved, as each transaction needs to be separately handled. I've been in a bank and I've had my photograph taken in excess of 10 times and had to sign more than 20 pieces of paper and waste an entire morning just to get a few $100s converted into RMB and made available to me. Part of the other problem is China's visa system. We can work here all our adult lives, but if we don't take permanent residency or get married when we hit 60, we're forced to leave. China should really look at some flexibility for this, I think. In my case, when I turned 60, I'd already been married for 9 years. My working residential visa was turned without any fuss into a married residential visa. But that kind of visa does not allow any work to be done if the payment is made in RMB. So even though I'm a well-qualified IELTS teacher, I'm a former IELTS examiner, I can't legally help kids who need to take this test. I'm also qualified and experienced as a business trainer in cross-cultural change management. And once again, I can't do that work unless I'm paid for it in a foreign currency. If I'm paid in RMB, I break my visa conditions and the person paying me breaks the immigration laws. I could be deported, they would be fined, quite heavily too. I also know many people who got married just weeks before turning 60. Now, interestingly, China doesn't ask for proof of long-term commitment or any kind of evidence that the relationship is real. In some cases it is, in other cases it's not. So, to my detractors, I'll say this. There are literally thousands of people criticizing China on YouTube and other social media on a daily basis. Why should someone like me, who supports the country generally and loves his life in his adopted country, start to criticize the things that A, he can't change, and B, are not life-changingly bothersome? Someone said to me, there are so many people who speak positively on China that it's difficult to believe they are real. So here's my comment to that. There are many people in China extolling the virtues of living here, and there are very good reasons for it. We have two comparisons we can make. We can compare the place we now live with the place we left, and the place we now live compared to the time we arrived in it. In my case, talking of the two other places I have lived in, I'm British born, and I've been back there many times. Each time I visit the UK, I see there are more problems than when I left. It's gone backwards. My hometown is full of unemployed, often obese people, many of them sitting in wheelchairs or electric buggies. What caused a vibrant community that I left in 1987 to look like this today? I don't know. The main shopping street is about 50% boarded up. The shops that are left there are second-hand shops, what the British call op shops. They are fingernail artists, or they're mobile phone shops. There are no clothes shops, no food shops, no butchers, bakers, or even candlestick makers left in that town. And when I travel around England, I find it's representative, not all of England, but many places in the country. Why should I criticize China, a country that sees constant improvement in every measurable metric, when I can compare to the failures in economy and society in my place of birth? I also lived in Australia, and I found that to be a wonderful country, but with far too many laws. They govern day-to-day life. For example, it's illegal to take a can of beer to a picnic on the beach. If we ride our bikes to the beach without a helmet, we will be fined. If we ride on the footpath, we'll receive a fine. In one state, I'm told it's a requirement to have photo ID on a bike, and a fine applies if we do not. Speed cameras for cars are hidden and they ping us when we don't know they are there. And while I don't condone speeding, in China the speed cameras are all announced. There are signs and they sit atop a massive gantry, so anyone who wants to speed will know immediately they're going to get a fine. The difference between China and Australia in this respect is that China governs our behavior, while Australia profits from our misbehavior. There are no vaccine mandates in China. There are in Australia. I chose to be vaccinated because I trust the Chinese government. Many people in Australia were forced to be vaccinated because their government doesn't trust them. Comparing China then, when I came, to China now, it's important to remember that when I came here, and I chose to live here, it was cheap. It was also dirty and corrupt. My decision to remain was based on the fact that it was full of wonderful people, and I'd experienced some amazing travel destinations, and I wanted more time. It wasn't meant to be permanent. After I decided to remain in China, I started to see many positive changes. The cheapness has gone. It's not a cheap place anymore, but so is the pollution and the corruption. And with it, so has poverty and the crime that existed in those days. So, if you are a viewer who is offended by my lack of criticism, I'm sorry. It's because there is little to criticize about China. And as a foreigner in China, I'm acutely aware of what is good and bad in my own life. What is good far outweighs the bad, which makes any criticism invalid. And again, being honest, criticism from a foreigner in a foreign land shouldn't hold too much weight anyway. If we don't like it, we know what the choices are. They're open to us. We can go. Thanks once again for watching Jerry's Take on China, and please don't forget to hit that like, share and subscribe button. See you next time.